First and foremost, I would like to congratulate the We Protect Global Alliance for organizing this remarkable conference and summit. I would like to thank the government of UAE for being such generous hosts. I think we all had a wonderful, wonderful time, so thank you. And thank you to the governments who have, the Honorable Minister is here, and I'm sure there are other government representatives. Thank you all for taking the time, coming here, and giving your support to this very important cause for all our children. In 2012, when the winters were still coming, around October or the beginning of November, I was sitting in my office with a child who had been lured, enticed on social media with the promise of love. 15-year-old child, somewhere in northeastern part of India, living in a village. And here was a guy who was writing to her all the time, saying that I am in love with you, I am going to marry you, we are going to have a, happily ever after sort of a thing. She had never seen him. She had never met him. And when she did, he coaxed her to run away. She agreed. October of 2012, Sunita, the name has been changed, who was enticed over social media to run away, was trafficked and sold into slavery in New Delhi. She went, so-called by her own free will. When her parents went to the police station, her case was not registered because she was a missing child and she had just run away. There was no question of enticement. And she was raped, she was trafficked, she was sold, she was put in slavery, and then she was supposedly married off to a man who went on to make her be abused, be raped in sexual exploitation for other people. 10 years later, the law changed in 2013, by the way, in India. Every case of missing child had to be registered on a petition that we had filed. Child sexual abuse, new law came into existence called Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. And we thought that now the children should find that protection, that safety net that all of them deserve. In 2024, 11 years later, I woke up to the front page news of a newspaper where it said that mere possession of child pornographic material was not a crime, rules Madras High Court. Front page news, sitting in Delhi. Every newspaper in the country had carried this news. I was aghast. I asked my colleagues. We were running a program called Access to Justice for Children, focused on 4 particular types of child rape and sexual abuse. The abuse that happens in communities, the abuse that happens in commercial settings, the abuse that happens in the online digital spaces, and the abuse that happens in the cultural setting in the form of child marriage. And I spoke with my colleagues and I said, let's get the judgment out. A couple of days later, the judgment came. The honorable judge in his wisdom had decided that 2 boys who had been raped as like pre-teen boys, 10-year, 12-year-old boys who had been raped, abused, and this man was searching for these cases actively, downloading them, circulating them, was not guilty of any crime because he was in mere possession and had no economic interest of selling these videos. What can be more unjust in the world than the rape of a child being allowed by law? Here was a man who was actually creating the demand for this child rape. Here was a man who was actively searching for these videos. Here was a man who had been identified by our colleagues sitting in the United States. His information had been shared legally with the government authorities. For once the authorities had acted, this man had been identified, found, prosecuted, and the High Court had ruled that he had not committed any crime. By a stroke of a pen, we had legalized not child pornography, but the demand for child rape. How could I have a 9-year-old son. How could I explain to my boy that this was something which was allowed? How could we live in such an unjust society? We thought that somebody would act. The state would go in appeal. It did not. I spoke with all my colleagues after a month of understanding and realizing that nobody was acting on this. This man had now walked free with this advice from the court that he should get psychological counseling. It is a question of our perception and our understanding of what constitutes a crime. It is a question of what we allow the society to get away with. And here, by law, I am repeating, we had allowed such a crime to not only happen, but also be publicized. And like then, in February, anybody who had read the newspaper knew that he could actually go and search for child pornographic content and work on it. So we had to go in appeal before the Supreme Court. Now, who's we? As an individual, how could I tell the Supreme Court that when in a criminal case, the victim, who's not known to anybody, these two boys, they can't go in appeal. We have not identified them. The people who should go in appeal, the state is not going in appeal. And the victim has gone in appeal and has walked free. So I spoke with my colleagues and we approached the Supreme Court of India, saying that the government is a representative of the state. The government is not the state itself. The state is the citizens of India. The state is the Republic of India. The state should be us, all of us. And we went as a special leave petition asking the Supreme Court to allow us to intervene. This was a criminal case. There was a victim, there was a state, and there was the accused. We are a nobody. But with a collective group of people who had a consciousness that was aggrieved, we went and approached the Supreme Court of India. The court was kind. God was kind. The case was admitted, argued. And in India, we have a lot of people here would understand Hindi. We have a very famous dialogue from a movie that actually translates as date after date after date after date. We use this lightly. But it is one of the most horrific things that we are faced with when we approach the criminal justice system, that even today a case of child rape or child sexual abuse might take another 10 years to get cleared. That is the nature of the backlog that exists in India. And we were worried, first and foremost, that the Supreme Court should admit our case. But the second issue was, for each day that this judgment continues to persist in society, the demand for child rape will continue to exist and even become more pervasive. It will spread because suddenly nobody had anything to fear. So We asked the Supreme Court, act with urgency. This cannot be tolerated. And thankfully, in September, on the 18th, the Honorable Supreme Court of India gave a landmark judgment that not only did away with this entire perception of mere possession, but also changed the entire language of pornography versus child sexual, exploitative, and abusive material. Thank you. This is a change in perception. It is a change in consciousness. It is a change in narrative. From being an indulgence of adults, which the judge had termed pornography, it had become an issue of exploitation, of abuse, and which was no longer only dependent upon the visual depiction of a child or videos. It was now text. It was now voice notes. It was everything that could be deemed to be exploitative or abusive to a child in the cyberspace. It has also opened a new era of jurisprudence for civil society. As a concept, as a thought, civil society, if aggrieved, can actually approach the courts and say what happened there was unjust. What happened there was an injustice, a miscarriage of justice. At the end of the day, the right or wrong in a society would be defined by the law. The law will create the crime. Otherwise, it is just a moral wrong. And if law has to create a crime, then the law must also be not only active, but also be seen to be working. I have a question. Is this a counter by which I have to adhere to? Ideally, okay. I am so sorry. I am apologizing in advance. I will take 5 more minutes if the audience would permit me.
Please, please.
Thank you, ma'am. 2 weeks ago, I have a colleague whose 13-year-old niece was being harassed, abused on text messaging. She went to the police. The police refused to act, saying people will often change their testimonies later on. So what good is prosecution? You will change your statement, you will take back the case. We don't want to prosecute. She went from pillar to post. And after 3 days, 4 days, the case was finally registered. The perpetrator was found to be another 14-year-old who had actually hacked into somebody's phone and who, after hacking into somebody's phone, was doing this. As we come to the end of this remarkable meeting of minds, meeting of hearts, meeting of consciousness, we must expand our vision from the discussions with companies or the entire discourse that is happening on social media to also all the abuse which is being perpetrated through electronic means or digital media. The case that I was talking about from 2012 was a case where this person was on one side enticing this girl and then trafficking her. On the other, even after marriage, the private moments were being recorded and she was being threatened that they would be circulated again and again and again, something that we saw the children speak. So we have to combat or attack or change or address or just do away with this entire economy of rape, of child rape. The two cardinal principles being, look beneath the surface and follow the money. When there is a person who is actually coming before you, that person entrusts their hope, their faith in the judicial system, in the legal system, in the rule of law, in the state. And if the law enforcement agency is sitting there, their first response is that we are not going to even register the case, then where is the entire process? Who will guard the guards themselves? And at the end of the day, people will do whatever we allow them to get away with, whether it is the police or whether it is the people who are actually searching for this material. And if there is one thing that we have to take back from this conference, it has to be that this culture of impunity must die. A new culture of accountability and consciousness has to arise. And that new culture must be based out of a policy parity. We must understand that what happened here in India is not an isolated case. It is happening everywhere in the world in different countries because the laws are neither common nor being implemented with parity or enforced. So there has to be a policy parity for prevention, for protection, rehabilitation, prosecution. There has to be an understanding, a nuanced understanding of words that are being used. There is a difference when the policeman says this child has gone missing versus this child has been trafficked or kidnapped. There is a difference when we say a child has been physically assaulted or sexually assaulted versus when we say the child has been raped. Because that is a language that a person, a layman on the street would understand. Physical assault is something that a lot of people will not understand. Sexual assault is something that a lot of people will not understand, even the policemen will not understand. And in different laws, sexual assault may mean something else and rape means something entirely different. So we have to understand this policy parity and work accordingly. The second is that we must talk about investments in infrastructure. Infrastructure means technical infrastructure. I was very happy when I was listening yesterday to what you have been able to achieve in the UAE. But this is a borderless crime and it requires a borderless response. And if one child is unsafe in one part of the world, or if one person is downloading it in one part of the world, no child is safe anywhere. So that investment in infrastructure, that investment in technology, that investment is necessary. Institution building. The third is capacity building of these institutions. A convergence of the community's mindset. Our dear respected Minister Sir was saying this morning, it requires a whole of society and a whole of government approach. Thank you for saying that. But it also requires a whole of society and a whole of government accountability. Did I do what I could? The fourth is the children themselves, the knowledge amongst the children. The awareness amongst the children that we can report. And when we go to report, somebody will act. That understanding, that knowledge needs to be there, and the trust deficit that exists currently between the judiciary and the police and the people needs to be also done away with. The only way to doing it is through action, through increased number of prosecutions. Which is my fourth point. The economy of rape must be dealt with by enforcement. Follow the money. We are not doing that. Rape is one crime, and we are not even able to find the rapist in majority of these cases. But we must. Because what we are focusing on is, somebody said yesterday, it was something very, very good. Somebody had said, we don't need band-aid solutions. And that requires a comprehensive response and resolve framework. The last thing I would say is technology. Use technology for good. Let us have an international database with an internationally binding instrument that actually shares the data and information for all the sex offenders that exist who are actually downloading these things, circulating these things. Let us share that knowledge. These people are united in their approach. These are organized criminals who are actually doing it in an organized way. The response cannot be disorganized, which it is, unfortunately. We may be a very, very strong group of people sitting here, but we are only this many. And that can only change when each one of our actions results in something which, through media, through awareness, goes on to create a ripple effect, a cascading effect. Right now, each one of us is living in fear that our children are not safe, our grandchildren are not safe. Each one of us is actually, we have gone beyond that era of not me, not here, not now, not possible. Because in our bedrooms, anybody who's using a computer, anybody who's using a mobile phone is not safe. This fear needs to not be in our minds, but in the minds of the perpetrator. And this freedom from fear should be our main take back from this. How do we get away from this fear? And that can only happen, again I am saying, through increased enforcement. On one side, and working with the children, building the trust, building the love, building the culture where society is helping the child on the other. The child is not at fault. Any child who is coming on the screen and thinking, I did not report because I did not have the courage to speak up, is living in a society that has failed the child. We have all collectively failed that child. Because the notion of state, the notion of society, the notion of laws, the notion of constitutions has to provide that protection for that child. And if the child is living in fear, then somewhere we need to do more. At the end, I would like to say that history is going to judge us from what we do today. Children anywhere are not numbers. They are our children. So history is going to judge us from what we do today in terms of increased number of prosecutions, increased number of arrests, increased number of people identified, increased number of properties seized and attached, increased number of children who are coming up to report, increased number of rehabilitated children, increased number of mental health professionals, increased number of actions that each one of us has done. And at the end of the day, if we fail to protect the children, our children, nothing else we do in life matters. We can achieve anything in the world. It is immaterial if we fail to protect our children. This conference has seen a lot of growth. But we must give ourselves a time-bound frame to actually work against this evil. This crime is always changing its shape and directions, and we are playing catch-up. The laws are playing catch-up. The civil society is playing catch-up. That has to be, that idea has to be reworked, rethought, repackaged. The tech companies also, I would like to request, take some time in thinking not only about the company, but about the solution on the whole. The solution that can be scaled up. And, well, as we meet here next year, let us meet with some successes behind our belts. In India, which is probably where a very large number of children are being sexually exploited and abused, we have been able to prosecute about 6,000 individuals in the last 3 years. It may be a lot, but it is far too little, because it is not enough to create a deterrent. The foundation of action against this crime needs to be seeded in deterrence. And the fear that is in the mind of the perpetrator and not in any of the other people who follow the rule of law. I would like to see my children in the eye 50 years from now, my grandchildren 50 years from now. Or maybe I won't live to be 50, but 30 years from now. I would like to look at them and see them in the eye and say that we did what we could. We did not go down without a fight. We challenged, we questioned, we thought out of the box. And this is not business as usual. This is a crime, and it will be treated as such. The society collectively, the world collectively, is going to face this and win. Thank you all very much.